Hello, everyone, and good afternoon from Singapore. My name is Jui, and I'm the CEO of SGInnovate. Welcome to this edition of Leaders Dialogue. This edition is organized in partnership with our friends at CSIRO, the Commonwealth Science and Industrial Research Organization, Australia's National Science Agency and Innovation Catalyst. Let me just quickly introduce SGInnovate. We are a deep tech, talent, venture, and ecosystem builder backed by the Singapore government. And what we do is we help entrepreneurial scientists discover, launch what we hope to be potentially impactful deep tech solutions from Singapore for the world. And we do this once again through talent development, investments, and community building. As part of this mission, we are always looking for ways to bring together great minds from across the global deep tech ecosystem for insight and inspiration. We believe that discussions like today's are potential precursors of eventual action that will help us to address some of the world's most pressing challenges. When times are good, we don't give much thought to the science and technologies that underpin normalcy. Unfortunately, it takes events like COVID-19 to expose and crystallize the centrality of science in society. Today, we will talk about science and society from the perspective of the leaders of the scientific intelligentsia, their roles, their expectations, and the expectations of them by the rest of society. Needless to say, these expectations have been evolving very quickly and are growing in complexity. Senior scientists in public leadership have traditionally taken on a more advisory role, offering vital independent counsel on various matters. But now, science and innovation are inextricably linked to national policy agendas and economic resilience, because, as we have seen from the pandemic, many of the biggest challenges we face today have solutions that lie ultimately in science and research. Senior scientists are now strategists and ambassadors, serving as increasingly important bridges between industry, academia, and the public. They have their work cut out for them and must mobilize these networks, both local and international, to help us navigate the issues that are shaping the new normal of the next century. The ongoing climate crisis, the increasing frequency of zoonoses, the fragility of our global supply chains, and other gray or black swan events. To help us explore these issues, I'm both excited and humbled to moderate this session with two exceptional leaders. Both of them have had a hand in shaping the science and innovation landscape within their respective countries. First, we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Cathy Foley, Australia's chief scientist. One of her primary roles as chief scientist sees her advising ministries and the highest levels of government on matters relating to science, innovation, and technology. She also serves as a bridge between Australia's science and research community and industry partners, driving opportunities for collaboration. Prior to this, she was the CSIRO's chief scientist and has led numerous projects to champion Australian science and innovation, including the development of a quantum technology roadmap for Australia in 2020. One of the projects Dr. Foley and her team are most well known for is the development of the LANTEM sensor system, a superconducting sensor, which has helped with the discovery of billions of dollars of valuable mineral ores in Australia and abroad. From Singapore, we have Professor Teck Seng, who is the CEO of the National Research Foundation. As NRF CEO, Prof Loh has played a critical role in shaping Singapore's national direction for R&D and most recently led the development of our country's Research, Innovation and Enterprise 2025 plan. Before joining the NRF in 2012, Prof Loh was previously the Managing Director of the Agency for Science, Technology and Research, the founding principal of Republic Polytechnic, and the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at the National University of Singapore. He was awarded the National Science and Technology Medal in 2004 and has left an indelible mark on Singapore's research and education landscape. So without further ado, let's go pick their brains. Dr. Foley, Prof Loh, let me just start with a very broad question. I would suggest that perhaps Dr. Foley, you can begin. But what will the next 50 years look like for your R&D strategy, for Australia's R&D strategy?
Well, first of all, hi everyone, and it's really wonderful to be here, especially how we're able to be together even though the pandemic continues. Although we think that there's an end in sight, as we've seen the amazing development of vaccines happen at speeds we've never seen before. The reason I've started with that is, apart from also recognising that it's impacted very many people, and I hope that those in the audience have not had too much of an impact on them, and if they have, my deepest sympathies and condolences. But what we've seen is a consequence of research actually getting to a point where we're seeing the impact of, for example, better data sharing. We've seen open access of all publications relating to the pandemic being made available to everyone. And we've also seen cooperation globally, which has led to the development of vaccines in very many places where different parts of the world have contributed to different stages of developing a vaccine. And as a consequence, we've seen what people have said is a miracle, I've actually said is good science. And so what I think we're going to see in the next 50 years, if we get it right, and that's only if we get it right, and it's up to us as researchers to see how we can navigate this, is we're going to see digital capabilities really change the way science is done, so that all of us who are researchers will become data scientists to some extent. We will be seeing open science happening, so that sharing of data will occur in the next 50 years. We will definitely see quantum capabilities and quantum computing in particular, opening up new ways and new abilities to do research we just can't do because of the limits of classical physics and classical computation. I think we'll also see more automation in labs, so the role of the researcher and the scientist will be quite different, and we'll start seeing a new way of almost what I've described almost like you've heard of conceptual artists who design the concept and they had a whole lot of other people to do this, to build their concept. I can see us moving to a conceptual scientist model where the scientist actually has the concept, the science, the understanding, but reaches out to where is the best in the world to get the best world-class equipment to do the measurements, to make the samples, in silico descriptions, whether it's with a quantum accelerator to help us be able to do real calculations at the quantum level. And when you bring that all together with open science, challenge models so that we've got more focus on solving biggest problems, I can see the next 50 years being quite a new era for research and science.
Thanks, Dr. Foley. As we, in the course of adjusting to the pandemic and some of the emergent climate and sustainability issues, and the growing realization that these great black swan events seem to be happening with increasing regularity. Has there been any part of Australia's R&D policy that has had to take a back seat to accommodate these new challenges?
So I suppose what we've seen is actually government recognising that science can help them now. And I think one of the things we've seen in the past was researchers were seen as being able to look backwards and say what went wrong in the past, or look into the horizon to say what is coming on into the future. And one of the exciting things happened, and this was a consequence of Alan Finkel, who was the previous chief scientist who was in this role last year, and he set up what was called the Rapid Response Information Forum, where government was able to ask questions relating to the pandemic, and we were able to reach out to the broad research community through our academies and get rapid information within initially 2 or 3 days to answer these questions with the best information, going to the best scientists who are right at the forefront of the research. And then eventually we realized that was asking too much, but they were still able to get those answers within a couple of weeks. And this has opened the eyes to government of what is possible by having a pathway to get this information directly from researchers. So we're setting that up now as a new way of operating with the government. So coming through the chief scientist and the office, connecting in through our National Science and Technology Council to be able to have at the call of government, the whole research community to be able to answer questions which are going to be relevant for not just the COVID management, but we know there are so many other challenges we're dealing with, low emissions, food futures, energy provision, and so on, not to mention health and manufacturing. And so we're already seeing this as being a new way of thinking for government and seeing researchers in a different light.
Thank you for that, Dr. Foley. Prof. Low?
Thanks, G.
On Singapore's R&D strategy for the next 50 years and the impact of recent events on that strategy.
Well, thanks, G. Thank you for inviting me onto this forum. Very happy to share some of what Singapore has been doing and what we are planning to do looking forward. A lot of what Cathy had talked about, about the new trends in science is something that we all subscribe to. But just taking a bit of a step backwards to look at where we've come from. Singapore's journey in science and technology is one that is very short compared to Australia, for example, or some of the more established scientific nations of the world in the UK, Japan, the United States, Germany, France. We actually started investing seriously in science and technology only in 1991. So it's about 30 years. And we are now in our 7th five-year plan. If you look back, our initial focus of our investments in science and technology was very pragmatic, being Singapore. It was investments in science in support of our economic narrative, ensuring that we are competitive and building our scientific base so that we can anchor ourselves in attracting some of the best technology companies to Singapore. As we journey forward into coming to where we are today, we have realized that that narrative is insufficient. We now are looking forward to see how we can apply science and technology to address some of the critical issues that Singapore as a nation faces up to. And these are issues that are faced by many nations in the world. Aging, climate change, needing to transition to a low carbon economy, phasing up the pandemic. But Singapore being a small country, being geographically located in where we are, we have a particular perspective. And because of our smallness, we have to do things a certain way. But what we hope is that, by doing it well, we can contribute to a global body of knowledge and hence, contribute, to global initiatives as we move forward. So moving to the future, Singapore remains committed to spend 1% of our GDP on research, government spending. That is substantial. So in the next 5 years, we have 25 billion. And moving forward beyond that, we think this commitment remains. And what has changed beyond, now the dual narrative of addressing our economic strategies with science, as well as addressing some of our existential needs, for example. What we also will need to do is to continue to enrich our scientific base. And that commitment is one that is supported by my Prime Minister downwards, right? To ensure that we continue to invest in basic science. Now, Singapore being a very, very small country, this means that, if we are going to address the interest that Singapore has in the science that we want to do, we need to go into partnership because we're too small as a country. So moving forward, we will see more extensive partnerships that we will form to address some of the very exciting and critical science and technology areas that we require. If we address climate change, for example, we take climate change very seriously. If we look at it from our perspective, we see it in two broad approaches. One, that is mitigation. What can we do to see how we can contribute to global efforts in, managing climate change and see that we can slow down the increase in global temperature rise, etc. But for us, it's also critical that we address the adaptation issues. It's a reality that we may have to face up to sea level rises. And if it does happen, 1 meter, 2 meter in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the impact on Singapore could be dramatic if we do not take measures to adapt to face up to this. But even more critical, as G mentioned, what if there's a black swan event? How do we put in place strategies to address a freak wave hitting Singapore, a 5-meter, 10-meter wave? We can't conceivably build a 10-meter wall around Singapore, right? So this will allow scientists to come up with interesting research questions. So, looking forward, as I said, even as we push forward to do science and technology, to do R&D in technologies that will support the industries that we have in Singapore and the industries that want in Singapore, we will have to look how we are going to address the technologies and the science that will stand as a good state in phasing up to the energy issues that we have to address, the aging problems that we will have to face up to, the climate change issues that is very real for an island state. So, I will stop there because that hopefully, gives, our participants a perspective of where Singapore has come from and where we are looking to move forward to, in the next 5, 10, 15 years at least.
Thanks, Prof. And of course, as though those challenges were not enough, there are also, we also have to face up to new geopolitical tensions that have cropped up in the last few years. And, I have a question on, how has that affected the conduct and commercialization of science and technology in your respective countries? Prof. Loh, perhaps you want to take a crack at this one first? I mean, how do we deal with this?
The geopolitical situation in the world is always changing.
Yeah.
But I would like to think that, when we work on the science, there are no boundaries and we should all work on this together. But obviously, there are economic benefits that can be reaped from the investments in science. And how we actually then, capitalize on the investments will be one that may cause us to have some concerns as, especially in Singapore, we are host to a multitude of multinationals from the United States, from Europe, from Australia, from China. And, there are tensions between nations, between companies, but for Singapore, we have always to be conscious that, we tread on a very, very thin line carefully, right, to address, the concerns that some of our American companies may have. At the same time, we also have to address the need to work with, the big emerging giant in Asia, which is China. At the same time, we are open to working with a multitude of other multinationals in Singapore. But more critically, I think, for us in Singapore, we see that there are many common platforms that we can work on together without concerns of this geopolitical tensions, right? The environment, for example, right? Addressing the pandemic. Now, even as we address COVID now, as you're aware, Singapore had been able to put our science and tech expertise that we have built over the last 20 odd years, and pivoted to addressing the COVID issues with some level of success, to put us to where we are. Even as that is happening, we are actually putting in place a pandemic preparedness program addressing not the current pandemic, but the future pandemic, right? Now, to do so, one of the work stream is building a network of partnerships around the region, and then, to further afield, right? So immediately around us will be ASEAN neighbors. Then as we move further afield will be India and China and Australia and New Zealand, right? So it's about, a community of scientific colleagues working together to address, common issues of needs, right? And this is not going to, the next pandemic, may be upon us sooner than expected. So, there are a lot of common issues that we can work on, right? From which there could be opportunities, to capitalize on it for economic benefits. But I think that depends on the cleverness of each industry ecosystem, to tap on on the outcomes of the research activities that we put in place.
Thanks, Prof. Dr. Foley, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think we need to remember that science starts up from discovery, and then and it tells us new information. And then as something becomes interesting and might have an application, we see it being engineered into an outcome of some sort that can then be commercialized, and you need to have social license, you need to have the business model that will work, you need to have a market that will buy it, you need to have government and regulatory policies in place to make sure that we've got the standards and the safety mechanisms to make sure that we've got the laws in place to make something work in a universal way. And I think one of the things which is fantastic is at that discovery stage, as Teck was saying before, is that is universal, and you want to get the brightest minds breaking through our current knowledge. And that is usually published in peer review journals, and so therefore it's made available to everyone to read. And it's something which then means that it's a perfect pathway to continue to have, regardless of any geopolitical tensions, a way of having soft diplomacy to keep the world connected. And I think as researchers and scientists, that's something which we really need to take on board and recognise where there's great opportunities to collaborate regardless of the geopolitics that are going on. And as Teck said, that they come and go. Science is enduring, and it's something where it also can often lead to those connections which, when situations change, you've got something to build on. And then, as with any great science discovery, of course, as soon as it becomes interesting, of course, everyone's going to be competitive to try and see how they can turn that idea into something that has impact for the national good of every country that's engaged with that, and as well as for businesses. And so that's where you have to start being savvy and, of course, operate under the rules of good commercial engagement, which I think is something we're seeing is we're getting better at. I know in Australia that we're probably still emerging from that research translation. We've got some wonderful examples and a huge acceleration of that, because it is a policy for the government to see much greater benefit and prosperity coming from the investment of research. And we're seeing a real cultural shift as our researchers are beginning to see how they can take their research and turn it into prosperity. But we also recognise that Australia is a very small market. And so particularly in deep tech technologies, which really do have potential world markets, we need to make sure that we're able to engage globally. And so it's getting that balance right and understanding, where the situations are where we can contribute and where it doesn't matter who you're working with. And sometimes you have to keep information close just to get a competitive advantage. And that's just the way business is done.
True. Well said. But as small countries, both of us in the overall scheme of things, Australia and Singapore, how do small countries like Singapore and Australia keep up and compete with larger countries with significantly bigger research and innovation budgets like the US and, of course, increasingly China? And let's not forget Europe, which is still huge.
Absolutely. Well, it's obvious the answer is collaboration and reaching out. I think this research community is global. The importance of having events like this, I think the ability of connecting digitally has seen that extraordinary acceleration where over the COVID pandemic period. And I think what I'm seeing is stronger, more equal collaborations because of the ability to partner with others. Doesn't matter where you are, as long as you've got a computer and an internet connection, you can, around a Zoom meeting, everyone's pretty equal. We're all wearing clothes, we've all got funny backdrops, and we're all just being us. And all we're bringing is our minds and our ideas to the table. And I think that when we're able to do that, you start seeing some fantastic things happening. And I'm actually very hopeful that what we'll also see is the beginning of the opportunity for developing nations to be able to collaborate more. So that you might think Australia and Singapore are small, but there's a lot of small nations like African nations, South American nations, even some of the Asia Pacific nations have the potential to not sort of that conceptual scientist comes in, so that you partner and be able to capitalize on the investments of bigger countries. And then we're remembering that if you're making a small contribution to something that becomes commercial, that you're able to set up, IP arrangements that allow you to get your bit of the process, or the rewards if something ends up being a commercial product. Knowing that the way anything develops from a concept in a lab that ends up being something, say, a massive big impact, takes a lot of people along the way. It's not just one person that does it. And where we have to be smart is very early on when we're collaborating, is understanding the rules of engagement, I guess, the IP management, and the willingness to make sure that we are generous and that we give everyone their just rewards for their contributions, and not being greedy.
Prof Low?
Well, I agree completely with what Cathy has said. Singapore is much smaller than Australia, actually. Unfortunately, we have a very enlightened government that continues to support science at the level they have supported. But we know that the amount that we spend on research per annum is actually minute compared with what is spent globally. And as Cathy said, the critical thing is for us to partner. In reality, our interest in the science that we want to address is actually wider than what we can do by ourselves in Singapore. And as such, a partnership is critical. But how do we partner, right? Singapore has extensive partnerships at the government-to-government level, for example. We have one with UK. Actually, we have one in Australia, which I shared with Cathy earlier. We have a comprehensive strategic partnership with Australia. And apart from defense and trade, science and technology is one. So, by doing so, we can actually, get together to decide on what are the areas of common interest between Australia and Singapore. And then, to pool our resources together. And hopefully, by working together, we'll be able to achieve a greater impact from the resources and efforts we put in. But we also do other partnerships which are smaller in scale. So this is a key strategic approach for us to ensure that, we address the science. But, it's often asked of me by my Deputy Prime Minister, who's my chairman. He says, Teck Seng, we are so small, what you spend in AI is a minute amount compared not to a country, to a company in China. So how can we be competitive? And I suppose sometimes we have to be a bit clever in how we manage our resources. And in AI, as you know, data is important. Our national data, which we collect very well, is an asset for us. Being small, it also means that we can link technology and science with policy very tightly. It allows us to build sandboxes to allow, experimentation. So there are certain benefits that we can offer. And as you know, we have always touted ourselves to be we can provide national test beds, which may be of interest to Cathy. We intend to, develop a national quantum safe network, and it is national, right? And with that in place, we can offer to partners to work with us on basically testing, a quantum comm systems, for security assessment, etc. This is for our national interest, but as well as interesting science and technology, right? So I would say that, Singapore always remains open in terms of partnership. We have all this G2G partnership, but in a very proactive manner, we establish an organization called CREATE. This is the Campus for Research Excellence and Technological Enterprise. This was the view that Dr. Tony Tan, the inaugural chairman of the NRF, had. He says, at that time in 2006, we have two universities which have some reputation in research and A-star. That doesn't make Singapore a science and technology hub. Just look at Boston and London, look at the multitude of universities and institutes they have there. So we have this strategy for trying to bring some of the best universities in the world to Singapore. And as you know, today we have 9 top organizations partnering us at scale doing research in Singapore. So beyond my 2 universities that are now globally competitive, and we have 2 smaller upcoming universities in SMU and SUTD, I've got Berkeley here, I got MIT here, I got Cambridge here, I got Hebrew here, I got CNRS. This is latest. I just signed a letter of award to CNRS for a big program with us in Singapore. So this is another way of partnering, and this not only working on good science, but we hope to also bring some very exciting young scientists to Singapore along with these programs. So, Cathy, we are quite happy to explore further how we can work together with Australia, expand the partnerships that we already have.
That's
very exciting. But ultimately for these, for science to really impact society, it needs to be commercialized, right? So, I mean, in Australia, Dr. Foley, what is sort of the principal mechanism by which science and technology is commercialized? I mean, how important are startups in that process, for example?
So, yeah, look, this is something which is really interesting and has been quite a bit of a culture change in Australia. I think in years gone by, we didn't have that entrepreneurial spirit. We had quite siloed setup for our sector, where we had the universities, government labs, industry, and things happening in states, all being separate and working independently. And what we're seeing is the realization that that's not a good way to operate, because they all have different roles to play. They all have different incentives. And also it means that we're not sharing the true human capital and potential across the boundaries. So it was also meaning that we were putting a lot of investment into research, but it was being a lot of the great ideas that were coming from Australian research were being commercialized internationally. So we had a bit of a culture change. Part of it was the appointment of the CSIRO Chief Executive Officer, who is Larry Marshall, who had spent 25 years working in Silicon Valley and had started multiple companies and had proven that he could turn fantastic physics into amazing outcomes commercially. And he came back to run CSIRO, and with that brought a whole lot of culture change for the country, which, I must admit, I'm very proud to have worked with Larry and learned a lot from him, because one of the things he introduced was what we call the ON program. It's an accelerator program, which is like the lean launchpad approach, where for many scientists, I know when I went to university, a good scientist did great science, published it in the best possible journals, and then started their next science project. And the idea of commercializing something was just an anathema, was something which was not part of the expectation. And now we've seen this significant change that we're getting to a point where we're encouraging researchers to go about design thinking their research. So even though it might be fundamental research, how might that, if it's successful, lead to an outcome, and how might you see that take a pathway? It doesn't mean you have to do it all on your own, but you can, with any research, you can sort of have some really good basic research being done, and you can go left or right depending on where you think there might be a better outcome. And by going through this, what we call ON program, it allowed researchers to understand the market and ask questions and talk to lots of people who are potential customers to say, I've got this great idea, would you buy it? And they were quite shocked to find that, no, actually, we're not interested at all. But if you change your science to something else and do just a little tweak, suddenly there's a huge market there, and you've got a major solution to something which has been a really difficult nut to crack. So suddenly, instead of going down a pathway to no market, they shift. And we've seen in the time that program's started, over 65 companies set up, and it's an example is V2 Foods. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's a veggie burger, which is made out of soybeans that tastes so much like meat that even Hungry Jack's general CEO didn't know the difference between his meat version of his patty and his vegetable one. And so it's become a major company, international, very quickly, and seen extraordinary growth because they were able to identify what the market was. So that was the first thing. And then the second is the venture capital that's needed to be able to invest. So people forget that there's a point where government's role is not to be investing in commercial things. It's actually when the business has to take over, and that handing over of the risk. And I think a lot of researchers don't understand that, and that in Australia anyway. And so that's been a real learning curve for us. And I am amazed at how quickly they've embraced it, so that we're seeing, what was in the past, for example, Australian National University, which is one of our top universities in the country. Its physics department, which is also headed, the university is headed by Nobel Prize winner Brian Schmidt, and its physics department was filled with, well, not only just Brian originally, but a whole lot of absolutely top award-winning scientists who were very academically focused. And suddenly that department, through this process, has become a hotbed of startups, so particularly in the quantum area. And I just went to a launch the week before last of a new liquid instruments technology, which was coming out of the LIGO project, seeing how this, they developed an instrument which is so universal and so useful that they were set up a company, and it's it's something which all of us will have it on our research desks in the future, because it's such a fantastic instrument. And that came out of LIGO. So who would have thought that such a fundamental experiment would have something so useful, which was for everyone. Just like Wi-Fi came from radio astronomy and the people thinking about how to deal with signals between antennas wirelessly. So, these sorts of things where fundamental research leads to opportunities needs that ability to leave the laboratory. And we're in that process. I'm not going to pretend we're where we need to be. We're on a journey to get there. But the massive, rapid change is something, from my perspective, so exciting to see. And we're seeing different initiatives from government to set up to sort of push a little bit. We're seeing the investment, first of all, in main sequence ventures to have venture capital coming in at the early, lower TRL levels and really helping the business models evolve. And that's sort of what we're seeing now, is it's sort of coming together. And I'm really looking forward to the next 5 years, because I think that we'll see a huge shift and flourish of great startups, and a whole new career pathway for researchers to be not just a narrow academic pathway, but a realization they can have rich and fulfilling careers by spinning out a company and following through their dream.
Prof, this is something very close to your heart, enterprise and commercial.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on commercialization?
It's not only close to my heart, it's close to my boss's hearts, right? They want to turn, research dollars into real dollars. I think, if you look back at Singapore, we are where we are today because of foreign direct investments. We hosted, most of the top tech companies in the world in Singapore. We have built ourselves on top of the investments in Singapore. And our initial investments in science and technology R&D was in support of these companies in Singapore. So, we have big corporate, partnerships with Procter & Gamble, with Rolls-Royce, with Thales, you name it, we have partnerships with them. But I think going forward, we realize that, even as we want to continue working with the multinationals that are anchored in Singapore and continue to work with them to expand their activities in Singapore with higher level of technology or work that they bring to Singapore from their home nations, we need to see how we can translate our own technologies out to benefit our own SMEs, and also potentially to see whether we can build our own company through startups and spin-offs. So, when I meet with my Israeli friends, I say, I would like to be like them. They say they like to be like us, right? But in reality, I think we need to, for Singapore's future economic growth and vitality, we need to have, a very vibrant multinational presence in Singapore that is a very integral part of us. We need to have our own SMEs who are able to be receptacles of, technology and grow into globally competitive, small companies, and potentially, building them into big companies. We like them to be like the Mittelstand of Germany, right? And then our spin-offs, right? We have a few unicorns, right? most recently, there was a company listed in the Singapore Stock Exchange called Nanofilms. That is actually really in deep technology, material science, deposition systems. But that spun off from NTU in 1999. It took them 20 odd years to be listed. They were successful much earlier, but to be listed at $1 billion plus in terms of capitalization, it took them 19 years. But these are interesting outcomes that are appearing that gives us confidence that our investment in science and technology is bearing fruits. But we need to catalyze this activities, right? So one of the things we put in place is to see how we can bring the research community closer to industries, the whole spectrum of industries, from the big players to the small players, right? So we have corporate labs, we have consortiums, we have platforms being constructed to bring the communities together. At the same time, we are trying to encourage our young scientists and our brilliant scientists to be adventurous, to take their technologies out. But we lack an ecosystem, unlike Silicon Valley, right? Because we know that not all the top scientists are great managers, right? So what can we do to be able to help them build their ventures, right? And as such, we NRF tried to do something like this with Temasek, with an organization called Zora. In some ways, SGInnovate is in this space. And these are just early efforts by us to try to catalyze this space, right? Especially working in some of the technologies that may be a bit more difficult beyond the digital space. They have seen some great successes like C and all this, right? So I would say that the ambition for us must be to be able to translate technologies out. But actually, the important thing for us now is actually to see translation beyond just commercial applications, but we want to see whether our technologies can provide us with solutions and solution options to some of our very important issues. We did it with water, and fortunately, we also could have created a water industry around it, right? We are looking to see whether we can do the same for energy, right? So I would like to think that addressing our national issues and the economic narrative are not mutually exclusive. But you're right, the ability to link enterprises with research through a very vibrant innovation ecosystem, right? It's very important. Thank you.
When we talk about competitiveness, commercialization, ultimately, it comes back to having the right human resource substrate. And I know, Dr. Foley, when you assumed the position of Chief Scientist of Australia, you did an interview with ABC, and you talked about citizen science. What is the role of STEM education in making us better, stronger in research and development?
Well, I guess the school training is so critical now that if you look at where the jobs in the future are, and in Australia, there's been a number of different initiatives done looking at roadmaps to say hydrogen, space, quantum, even environmental consulting, and so on. All those jobs, AI is another one, they've all got tens of thousands of jobs there in the future. And we need to make sure that we have the workforce coming through, but also the realization that automation and change in preferences will mean that many of the jobs that have been identified as the traditional pathway of a career won't be there in the future. And we need to make sure that our young people coming through understand that they are able to keep their options open by studying as much maths and science in the last years of school when they have a choice to in Australia anyway, what subjects to study. So we've actually been in putting out a whole range of different programs to make sure that that STEM is encouraged, but I have to say that we've not been successful, and the numbers of young people doing subjects in the maths and science in the last years are not at the level that we need them to be, and we're working on that. But we're also recognizing that we need to get more people choosing to have to undertake tertiary training in the areas where there are future opportunities. And I think what we're missing out on is a realization of what a STEM career looks like. So most people think of it as being that narrow pathway of being a university professor. And yet some work done by the Royal Society some years ago now, but said that from the number of people starting a degree in science, only 0.45% of them become a university professor. So that means that 99 plus of everybody else does something else. And so how do we actually make sure that that young people can see that STEM training and education can open up an enormous range of opportunities for you? And it's something which I think we've not nailed globally at all, because most people don't see a scientist or a chemist or something advertised in the newspaper or on the job lists on the internet. They don't realize that, public service, for example, needs a lot of good scientists in order to be able to make good policy advice to government. We need industry to have many more scientists and researchers and engineers to be able to make sure they're innovative and therefore be globally competitive. And then even in Australia, we have also publicly funded research agencies which are there to work on major long-term problems. So in Australia, we've got the CSIRO, but we've also got the Australian National Nuclear Science and Technology, Defence Science and Technology, Marine Biology area. We've got Bureau of Meteorology, Geoscience Australia, and there's a huge number of publicly funded agencies that also need researchers there. And so when you think about that, where I think we haven't quite got that sort of way of using the everyday media for people to understand what a career looks like. And if you think of, I don't know if you have the Big Bang Theory that's on TV, a lot of people think if you're a physicist, you're going to be like that. Well, there's a very narrow group of physicists that are of that nature, and we celebrate them because they often come up with great science. But from being a physicist, that is the minority. All the people I did my university degree with are all doing amazing jobs in a whole range of different areas. And so how can we redesign or change that stereotype so that people, men and women, girls and boys, can see that they could be a scientist? And you don't have to be Einstein's relative to be a scientist or scientific thinking. Data scientists, people engaged with all aspects of research can have a whole range of, sort of, I guess, in intellect. And I think we sometimes think it's only for the super smart, nerdy types, when in fact, there's a huge range of careers, from people who make things, who've got really good technical skills, through to those who are the brilliant thinkers. And we need everyone in between. And this is something which I don't think we've got across clearly enough. And I know it's something which you can see I'm passionate about, but we have to get it right, not just in Australia and in Singapore, but globally.
I have a very good question here, which is related to the topic of manpower development. And the question is, do you have suggestions to develop your respective science and tech manpower, researchers and administrators, so that manpower can be ready for the future? There's a second question on entrepreneurship, but I think we've kind of dealt with that. Prof, would you like to take this question?
Oh, well, first, to add on to Cathy's articulation of the issues that we face up in STEM, no different from what we hear of Singapore. The sad thing, I wouldn't say a sad thing, what we face in STEM is a consequence of Singapore's success. That is because of the great growth in the service industry in Singapore that provide, many opportunities. As such, our young people are, a spot for choice as regards, the industry sectors that can go in beyond the traditional, sectors that are heavy in engineering. But, the world is changing, and I think young people have to realize that, as Cathy says, there is a whole slew of very exciting jobs you can go into with a background in STEM, right? But, there is a great fear among some of our young people for physics and mathematics, I suppose, the challenge for us is how to make STEM subjects exciting, and that is something that we all have to work on. Now, as regards manpower, preparing our people for a job in science, and were you referencing to R&D and science management?
Yeah, the question was how to develop your respective science and tech manpower, researchers and administrators. I suppose that's an interesting part. It's not just the performance of science, the conduct of science, but also the administration of science. So maybe let's talk about the administration of science.
I think, first of all, I think, we encourage our researchers to look beyond the particular subject they work on, because, a lot of the things they work on has got, a cross implications with other branches of science and the social sciences. As you know, we are working on a very, very big, program on precision medicine. But, we cannot address only the science that relates to, the delivery of the best healthcare. But, you are doing healthcare to citizens. And how do you, work with the citizens of Singapore such that we can arrive at a modality that, ensures that, the benefits is really realized by the citizens with the science that we are putting in place, right? When we look at, the urban solution sustainability space, right? Essentially, we're talking about the environment that people live in, right? So, social science is a very, very integral part of what we do. But, at NRF, we are very supportive of funding the social sciences that abuts the science, because we have a social science research council that will support, the other broader aspects of social science research, right? But, we also feel that, this social responsibility is something that, and ethics is something our scientists all need to be aware of, right? I suppose this broadened the base in terms of what our scientists and researchers should be aware of. And of course, today, as we want to see translation, we encourage them to, have ambitions beyond the lab, right? But, as Cathy says, there's a place for all. We still, want to ensure that there's a place for those who want to do the deep science, right? The discovery science that will open up new vistas for others, right? So, we'd like to think that in Singapore, we have that spectrum of activities that allows, each individual in our system to prosper, to succeed. The management of science is one that's difficult, right? We grapple with this in Singapore because we have a small population base, and we are constantly looking for. I'm looking for somebody to replace myself, right? Right. So I suppose we need to be a bit more deliberate in Singapore in terms of providing opportunities for our academics and scientists who prefers to, at some stage in the career, to go into management, right? Do we do it well? I do not think so. And that is why we have the situation that we are facing up to today, right? But we are learning, so we are trying to see whether there are other models that we can copy or can adapt, to suit us.
How about you, Dr. Foley? What does it take to become a Dr. Foley Chief Scientist of Australia? Is there?
Yeah, so first of all, I guess we're talking about manpower, but there's lots of women power as well. So we need to make sure we embrace the full human potential. And there's great opportunity there. I think we sometimes have unconscious bias that means that we don't necessarily recognize the opportunities that bringing women into the workforce can really achieve. The other is also, as Teck already mentioned, is that I should have mentioned it before, the user interface, the design and the human experience of engaging with any technology or any solution is absolutely critical. And so we need to recognize that it's almost not maths and science, but there's that human aspect, both the social science, the ethics, the social license aspects, plus also the design and the humanities, arts area are equally as important, because they all come together to make a science concept turn into something that has an impact. But I think when it comes to leadership, I think one of the things is that, and this is something where I was very lucky as a mid-career researcher. Somehow or other, I was identified to go on to a lot of leadership training courses. And one of the things in that process was learning my self-discovery about who I am, how I operate, how people perceive me, what does good leadership look like, how sort of a whole range of different ways to engage depending on the situation. And also thinking like systems thinking, strategic thinking, and so on. Even how to read a spreadsheet for finances, so I can make sure I can follow the dollars in an organization. And these are things which are not necessarily naturally coming to many researchers, because those attracted into science sometimes are quite focused on the science and not so much on the human aspects. So I think that investment into lifting the skill sets of us as people, our leadership skill sets, is something where we need to make sure it's an investment made, that we go through and put the effort into it, and those of us who are interested in the opportunity to lead, which is a great privilege and a very rewarding thing to do, and leave your favorite science behind as you sort of do one-to-many instead of one-to-one in the way we do our work, it does require a lot of extra, personal development and self-knowledge. And I think sometimes we don't realize that, and that's very critical for, I think, successful science leadership.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of the time because I'm sure you have other commitments after this. So to the audience who have sent in some questions, I have to apologize. We can't get through all of them.
Yeah, there's some great questions there.
Let's take a crack at real quick, because we only have 3 minutes. Funding. There was a question on how we can cut red tape on funding. I'm not sure if there's an easy answer to that.
Well,
anyone like
hard enough to crack, that's for sure. But it's one where you've got to get that balance right, and it's something which I must admit I'm quite interested in, because it is raised everywhere around the world. And you've got, as a researcher, if you're doing work which is funded by the government, that means you've got a huge responsibility to make sure the governance is right and that the money is well invested. So on one level, we shouldn't feel entitled that I'm a good scientist, give me money, because that is just not acceptable. People paying taxes, and those taxes being used for you as a researcher could be used in other things like better healthcare or more education or better roads or more hospitals. So we need to be very mindful that it's a privilege. That's the first thing. And then the second is those of us who are managing research granting programs, that they're as unbiased and they're as inclusive as possible. And I think we're a long way from that, because we're still just coming to terms with unconscious bias. The fact that science sector has been quite oriented towards males and not females, and so that's something we haven't landed. But then also all the stuff that goes in for governance, and it's interesting looking at systems so that you only have to fill in forms once and update them. There's the potential to actually look at different processes where you start with ideas first and fund ideas, and then as a 2-round thing where you put in a short application and be able to review them, and then come back with a longer one when you've down selected. There's a range of different methods you can use, but I think you've got to first of all have a principled approach to think about what is it we're trying to achieve, what is okay, what isn't okay, and where those boundaries are, and base it on evidence. We're meant to be researchers. We're meant to be doing things which are based on evidence. And I think this is a good time for us to say, now that we've got all these new tech tools to support us, how can we use them well to get that balance right?
Thank you. And I think we're at 1 o'clock, again, conscious of your time. So I'm going to bring this to a close, and I'm just going to invite Prof. Low and Dr. Foley in 30, 40 seconds. For some of our younger audience members, what advice do you have for the next generation of STEM professionals? What words of encouragement or advice might you have, Prof?
Well, actually, you are in a very difficult period, which means it's also very exciting because there are many many important and research questions that needs to be asked, addressing all the issues that we face up to. At the same time, a lot of things we do are opening up new opportunities. Cathy talked a lot about quantum. It's an area that we think, holds new opportunities for us to have a new industry sector for ourselves. Even as we face up to the energy issues, the decision that we made as to which is the most portable green energy source that Singapore should go for. Is it hydrogen? And potentially hydrogen working in Australia because they have lots of green energy. So lots of exciting things to be worked on, right? So I would say that, for young people, science and technology is as exciting as when I first started my journey in science and tech. It could be even more exciting, right? So I would say, come join all of us on this very exciting journey.
Thank you. Dr. Foley?
Yeah, so I guess we need you, first of all. The world needs people to put their ideas forward and to be curious and to be skeptical, but to do research in a way with high integrity so it's trusted, and make sure that whenever we put information forward, that we do it in a way that is unbiased and selfless as possible, so that we're looking at how we can have outcomes that make a difference to the many. And you'll find that your rewards will come regardless. So you don't need to look out for yourself. What I've found is that you have your eyes on the horizon, on the goal of trying to do what science and technology can do for society. And then you find that all the other stuff comes up behind you.
Thank you so much, Professor Teck Seng and Dr. Cathy Foley, for spending time with us today. Thank you so much. And on behalf of the audience, big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
A good day or evening ahead.